oh, you just don't take it seriously enough. And that's just not the truth. Like once you actually get in the weeds and you actually have to deal with what goes into conducting operations, leading personnel, you start to mellow out of that like cadet phase of like, we got to be fit, we got to be super hua all the time, and we're just high functioning all the time because they've never been beat down.
All right, welcome to the Occult Podcast. Today we got a new episode for you, so here we go.
All right, y'all. So the first thing we're going to discuss as far as this topic goes, so transition from your gold bar to your black bar. So I know, Josh, you're a black bar. I recently promoted within the past like 5 months or whatever. What would you say a difference is, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, like butter bar, black bar, like there's not much of a difference there. What would you say like the difference was from you between the time you were the butter bar to a more seasoned lieutenant?
So there definitely was a big difference. I do think as a fresh lieutenant at butter bar, you don't know the things that you don't know. So when you show up to your unit, you don't know the questions to ask or the people that you need to know or talk to. By the time you get that first 18 months, you become a black bar. Now you've spent time in the organization. You've got to know people. You know how the organization works. I think that's one of the biggest things. And then also knowing, like, you start to figure out what are the kind of questions you need to ask and finding resources that you could research answers before you even have to ask them. So what about you? Have you noticed?
I mean, the main thing that stuck out to me about what you just said was not having to ask questions. So not having to go to your commander, your company commander, or your captain every time you don't know what to do. So what I mean by that is you become more seasoned or experienced, I should say, and you know how to navigate the organization a little better. And what I mean by that is like understanding the staff sections. So S3, S4, S2, S1 functions, knowing how to use those tools. And then also knowing, here's who I need to go talk to, or here's who might know about that kind of thing. And then I go to that person. And if that's not the person I need, they direct me they push me in the right direction. And I think overall becoming a good lieutenant is just about being able to figure things out on your own.
I agree.
If you can be self-sufficient and not have to, I'm at the point now, I hate asking my commander questions. Like I'm like, let me go figure it out on my own. And that's kind of how I operate. I have a better understanding of what's going on. So I don't need to go to my XO and ask him, hey, or he or she, like, hey, what's going on? When are we doing this? I don't need to go to my commander like, hey, I don't know how to do this. No, like you figure it out. That's why you're getting paid so much. Your job is to figure things out with very minimal guidance. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I would say from when I was a butter bar to being a more senior lieutenant, that was one of the biggest aspects. Just being able to figure things out on your own, even if you don't know. People act like the longer you're in, the more you know. I'm not necessarily saying that's not true, but like it's about being able to better navigate the problem set.
Yeah. Another thing too, like I want to talk about networking first. So like networking, building those relationships, collecting products from previous missions or events or things that you've had to do. You collaborate with those people you're networking with. You give them your products. I give you, I get yours or whatever. I think that's pretty powerful too. And then it also, you can see like, oh, I've ran a range. I did this product. And now I look at yours. I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about putting the 8-step training model like at the bottom or whatever. And then your commander's like eating that up because like they're all about that.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think having a good relationship with the other lieutenants across the battalion, you don't have to be best friends with them, but having a good working relationship, being able to go to them and ask them, hey, I know you ran a range at this range because we have a bunch of different ranges, right? So you ran a range at this location. I want to see what your con-op was that got approved in the past, and I'm going to use it to develop mine. And also understanding, like, maybe learning aspects of it that you didn't even think, like, oh, the battalion commander might ask you questions about X, Y, and Z that you never even thought of. Because let's be honest, with our experience, at least within our unit, there's a lot of intricate details leadership might want to see. So getting products and other things from other lieutenants that have done it in the past that worked, that was successful, I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, and then also like having to do flip bowls or having to do investigations, having to do
Memos.
yeah, all these other things. You're not going to know how to do that necessarily as a second lieutenant, and these are all just skills that you build over time. So with that, we could segue into like KD versus staff, because I know like we know some lieutenants that have just been on staff the entire time. How do you think? Because they're also first lieutenants. How do you think their experience is versus someone who did platoon leader like twice in the XO?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think differentiates the staff officers from the officers that are down on the line is I think both things are beneficial. So having staff time and line time. When you're at the staff, right, you see it from a much more broad perspective. Yeah. Whereas when you're on the line, you start to learn the more intricate details that go into actually executing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think both have their own difficulties. Some would say you need to have a good amount of staff time before you go to the line and take on a platoon. And then there's some officers where they go straight to the line and then they come to staff, and it's vice versa. And some may argue like, oh, me having that time on the line helps me better understand how to operate up at the staff level. I think it just depends on the person and the perspective. Yeah. I think there's no one right answer, but like for me, I think I'm about to go to a staff position.
Nice.
And I've been on the line the majority of my time as a lieutenant.
He's going to take my job.
So I think for me personally, and with the problem sets that I'm going to be dealing with in that staff role, having that time on the line helps me better understand what they're dealing with, which helps me better facilitate what they need, if that makes sense.
And I don't think, because you could argue either way. You could say either like you need to be staff first or you need to be on the line first, but either way you go, you're going to learn those skills. And then when you get to that other side, you're going to be like, oh, I didn't think about it this way when I was at my last job, and I was telling, like, if you're in staff and you're doing like daily tasking orders or whatever, and you're tasking all these companies or troops, whatever, batteries to do some stuff, but you don't understand like all the other competing requirements, or that they don't have that kind of asset that you just task them to do or whatever. You get down to the line unit and you're like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, these daily tasking orders are getting out of control, you know?
Yeah, I would also say it goes into a deeper perspective as well. Like, I know for me, I had that like honeymoon phase. We've talked about it before. That honeymoon phase that you have with the Army, where you get to active duty and the workload's not so bad. You love it and everything's awesome. You love the Army. You can't wait to see what the Army has to offer. For me personally, my line time was a lot more difficult than my time being in the S3 operations. I think that like it didn't ruin my love for the Army, but it definitely
that honeymoon started.
It mellowed things out. Things started getting real, and you started having daily tasks day in and day out. Like you constantly had work to do, and you had problems that you had to navigate. You had to deal with personnel obstacles. You had to deal with all the stuff that goes into dealing with personnel and running on the line. And I think it seemed a lot more complex than what I experienced being a staff officer. I think it's a different kind of work because like the job that I'm about to go into, I notice it's not that it's easier, it's just a different problem set.
Correct.
And it's different from what I do now, and it seems easier, but it's just, it's still going to have its own difficulties, but it's just a different set of problems that you have to navigate. I know for me as a platoon leader, and I think a lot of other platoon leaders can attest to this, you're more so dealing with personnel. You may have that one thing that needs to get done on that one day at that one time. And you need that one person, that one private even. Like that one private can be so important because they have that specific skill set or they work in that specific section.
And they don't tell you that they're going to be gone.
And they don't tell you they're going to be gone. They don't tell you that they're going to have an appointment. And then you're hitting them up frantically, like, where are you at? What are you doing? And they let you know last minute, yeah, I'm at an appointment. And it's like, well,
you're not prepared to do that as a second lieutenant. As a first lieutenant, you might have encountered it, or like maybe talked to your peers and they've encountered it and kind of told you like how they dealt with it or whatever.
Yeah, I know I dealt with it a lot as a butter bar because I kind of like experiences may vary, but I got thrown into a lot at an early stage in my career. And I think part of that's MOS dependent. Like as a logistics officer, specifically a maintenance officer, my platoon's a lot bigger than your average platoon. And you're dealing with a lot more people with a lot more specialized skill sets. And you play a much more crucial role in the battalion than, let's say, a tactical leader, like you may think infantry platoon leader, or I'm not saying they're any less. I'm just saying it's a different problem set, and you may have a more involved role in the battalion.
And that also might be because, like you said, those line unit platoon leaders are all kind of cookie cutter. While your job, there's only one of you in the battalion.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, definitely as a PL, it's more personnel oriented, whereas up on staff,
it's all plans, big picture.
And then trying to please
politics. Yeah.
It's a lot more politics. Like you're trying to please your battalion XO. You're trying to please the battalion commander. You're trying to please the battalion S3, or you got some captain breathing down your throat because they're getting, so they're getting a lot of hate from their leadership. So
as far as going from second lieutenant to first lieutenant, what have you noticed, either yourself or some of your peers' maturity level?
Yeah, so I think it's not that the Army is going to suck. It's just that reality starts to kick in. Like I said, when you're dealing with fire day in and day out, you're just constantly putting out fires. That's kind of what we do as lieutenants.
Yeah.
You start to become low-key disenchanted at times.
Hopefully that's not your unit, but you'll see.
With your job, but it's just constant problem solving and frustration and dealing with people and all this other stuff. It gets real, and you're still doing cool stuff, but you don't realize you're doing cool stuff until after the fact. It's not cool while you're doing it.
That's fair.
TRADOC, for example, TRADOC, ROTC, Bullock, they have this way of presenting the Army to you in a way that it's so cool, it's sexy. They use these terms like battle rhythm, tactical sustainment operations. I don't know. But in reality, when you're actually doing it and you're actually dealing with it and orchestrating it, it's not that cool. And so I think when you come off a staff and you go to the line and you actually have to orchestrate operations, you have to conduct everything, and you start to realize all the obstacles that get in your way, all the problem solving that goes into it. It's just not always fun. It's not always cool. It's not always sexy the way it's portrayed in the recruiting video.
Yeah. And would you say that right there kind of makes you mature at a faster rate?
I do. And I think one, it's one reason why a lot of officers get out. They just get tired of dealing with the day-to-day, just high op tempo, high stress environment. I think it's good for you. I think it's good to face reality. And I've noticed with a lot of staff officers, like lieutenants that spent all their butter bar time on staff, and then it wasn't until they were a first lieutenant with 18 months in, almost 2 years in, and they finally get to a platoon and they think it's this great and wonderful thing. And then you start to see over time, they're up here and over the course of their PL time, it starts going down. Like, it's not that they hate the Army. It's just that reality starts to kick in. You start to see it's just not as cool as you think.
And with that though, the maturity aspect, you can see how they were, like you said, on staff, like 2 years in, they might have had like a
honeymoon phase.
They might have had that certain mindset, that super hua, like I'm going to change the world, and they find out just how much change they can make. And then they start to grow up a little bit and then just like accept the fact that this is their job. They're doing like specific tasks, specific missions, and it's not everything that they were told it was going to be or expected to be. Not that it's bad, it's just it is what it is, and they freaking grew up and dealt with it. They matured. Recommendations to second lieutenants. What would be one or two things that you would recommend?
I mean, I'm not going to say anything profound here. I would say just try to stay humble. I mean, it sounds cliche, but try to stay humble, try to learn as much as you can, lean on your NCOs. That's what everybody else is going to tell you. I know it. You probably get tired of hearing it, but it's the truth. I think this kind of goes back to the maturity thing. I have seen staff officers. They worked a decent schedule, right? Like they're not working super long, 12-hour, 13-hour days. I've seen staff officers that have not done that yet or they've not had to experience that yet. Mm-hmm. And they'll be up at staff and they're looking at you like, why are you so tired? Why is your attitude bad? Why are you why are you not going to the gym? Maybe because I laced up my combat boots at 6:30 this morning, and here I am 13 hours later still working. Like I didn't have a chance to do PT. Yeah. You get off work, you're tired. You may not get to the gym every day, and you'll have people that judge you because of that. They're like, oh, you just don't take it seriously enough. And that's just not the truth. Like once you actually get in the weeds and you actually have to deal with what goes into conducting operations, leading personnel, you start to mellow out of that like cadet phase of we got to be fit, we got to be super hua all the time, and we're just high functioning all the time because they've never been beat down. Mm-hmm. They've never had to face like those hardships of having a commander just in your butt all the time. Like you got to do this, you got to do that, correct your memo, your grammar's off, you didn't capitalize this letter, like just the dumbest stuff that goes into what we do. Yeah. You'll find that it may not make sense to you guys now, especially if you're cadets, but you're going to have lieutenants that don't necessarily have as much of a workload, and they're going to look at you like, well, why are you complaining so much? You're just being weak. And that's just not the case.
We're over here just waiting for that culture shock.
That day for them to be like, oh yeah, that's right, boy. You thought.
One piece of advice that I'd like to give is don't be afraid to read SOPs and doctrine to find answers before asking questions. You'll be surprised like what you can actually learn just by skimming random like regs. So I was recently researching the expert soldier badge, right?
Yeah.
And instead of asking the few people in our organization that have it, I'm sure they could have answered some of it, or they would have given me like half answers or from their experience or whatever. I just downloaded the thing online, and I skimmed through it, and I learned some interesting things that I wouldn't even known to ask, or like didn't know that like I should have been asking those questions. So that's kind of ties back to what I was talking about earlier. You're not going to know what you don't know, and just skimming, like, I mean, it sounds kind of nerdy, sounds kind of boring, but like if you have some off time or free time or whatever at work, you're waiting for whatever, I don't know, just like pull open like
AR 670-1.
Yeah, and see like just how long you can grow your hair or some shit.
I think you're right. Definitely digging into the reg. You can't always count on your company commander or your captain or your first line to give you a counseling or explain to you what your roles and responsibilities are. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you kind of have to dig into that for yourself and figure out, okay, here's exactly what I need to be doing and focusing on. And then also running that by your NCOs, right? Like talking to them about what they expect out of you as the LT or as the OIC, whatever the case may be. And just having a better overall understanding of what your roles and responsibilities are, what the scope of your responsibility is.
Kind of want to piggyback off of that. So you mentioned asking what you should be doing. Another thing you could do is you could also ask them what they should be doing. If you don't know exactly, like you're coming to the line for the first time, you have a general idea like, oh, I'm going to get task, and then I have them do the task. But like the day in and day out stuff, you could ask your platoon sergeants, section leaders, squad leaders, whatever. Hey, what are some of the things that I should be expecting from you? Because once they'll tell you some stuff, you might be like, that seems a little sus, or you might get some insight and be like, oh, I didn't even know that was part of your job, and now that's something additional that you can evaluate them on. All right, so that's it for this episode of the Elk Call Podcast. If you're getting value from this content, then give this video a like. Let us know in the comments and tell your friends.